Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome once again to the WP Builds podcast. You have reached episode number 356, entitled What's the State of Teams in the WordPress Space? It was published on Thursday the 11th of January 2024. My name's Nathan Wrigley and I'll be joined by our guest James Giroux in a few minutes' time, but before that a few bits of very short housekeeping. The first thing to mention is that if you are interested in all the things that we do, we would love for you to share that, share it on Facebook, share it on our Twitter, share it wherever you like. A good place to find out what we're doing is our schedule page, wpbuilds.com/schedule. And if you want to keep in touch, wpbuilds.com/subscribe. There's an email list there which you can sign up to, and we promise not to spam you. The other thing to mention is that if you are interested in having your own product or service inside our podcast, well, we do some advertising, we do some sponsorship slots. You'll hear one in just a moment. If you would like your product or service to be featured on our podcast, which gets out to quite a lot of the WordPress audience, head to wpbuilds.com/advertise and have a poke around there. If you've got any questions about that, just contact me in any way, shape or form. The last thing to mention is that now that Black Friday is well and truly over, we're back to our regular deals page, wpbuilds.com/deals. And there you will be able to find a filterable, searchable list of the deals in the WordPress space. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. Find out more by heading to go.me/WP Builds. One more time, go.me/WP Builds. And sincere thanks go to GoDaddy Pro for their really large ongoing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, what have we got for you today? Well, as I said at the top, we've got an episode with James Giroux. It's all about the state of teams in the WordPress space. Well, what does that mean? Well, James Giroux is the founder of TeamWP, and they've carried out a very extensive survey called the Team Experience Index. And it's a survey trying to gather information all about teams in the WordPress space, what they do well, what they don't think they do well, and how they can improve. Honestly, the detail that James has gone into is pretty incredible. So if you work in a WordPress team, or you're thinking of starting one or joining one, and you've got an intuition that there might be processes, thoughts, ideas, ways of improving, well, this survey will point you in the direction of ideas and things that you may wish to adopt within your team or company. Really interesting and pretty much unlike any other episode we've done. I hope that you enjoy it. I am joined on the podcast today by James Giroux. Hello, James. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Great to be here with you again, Nathan.
Thank you. It's always good to point out when guests have gone above and beyond. It's silly o'clock where James lives, so I really appreciate the fact that you've got up early and you're making the effort to talk to me. We're going to talk today a little bit about a project which we've spoken about in the past. It's called TeamWP. Before we get stuck into that, James, just very quickly, give us a brief bio. Tell us who you are and how long you've been working with WordPress.
So I've been in the WordPress ecosystem now for, 12 to 15 years, something crazy like that.
That's a long time, yeah.
I've been all around. I've worked in big marketplace companies like Envato. I've worked in hosting companies and large product companies like Gravity Forms and Stellar WP. And now I find myself in the unenviable position maybe of being a entrepreneur again, founder of TeamWP. TeamWP is really trying to help bring, I guess the best way to describe it is like modern HR or modern ways of working into WordPress product companies where maybe they don't have access to the kind of HR resourcing that other larger companies might have access to. So that's kind of where it started from.
What was the initial thinking there? Was it a sort of gap that you saw? Did you notice that certain companies, perhaps smaller companies that didn't have the time and the money to invest in those kind of thought processes? Because it takes time, right? You can't just come up with good procedures by chance. You have to sit down and work it out and maybe use the experience of people's previous jobs and things like that. Where did the inspiration come from? Did you see the need fairly glaringly out in the community?
Definitely. I mean, you don't have to go far to see where the tools are missing. I think that's probably the best way to describe it is the longer you're working, the longer you're doing things, the bigger your proverbial toolbox gets, right? You figure out how to communicate or how to lead or how to navigate things in different ways using different approaches. And I've been very lucky in that the experiences that I've had and the opportunities I've been in have involved a lot of extra training. But being in the community and hanging out with folks, you just see things around like ways of working or team norms or, like just how we approach problem solving, how we approach dealing with conflict and culture and things like that. There was just a lot of opportunity for maybe different approaches or different styles of having those conversations that were quite well known out in the rest of the tech ecosystem, but maybe not as well known in WordPress. And I found that kind of a head scratcher. And so I thought, well, here's maybe an opportunity to just bring in some of my own experiences, and not saying that I've got it all figured out either, but having done this for a while now, maybe I can bring in some of those experiences to help support other teams to do things better, because we want WordPress to grow. We want it to be sustainable. We want companies to last for the long term and not feel like they, hit a wall, especially developer founders who are, maybe like more interested in the tech than the team, and being able to offload some of that team thinking or provide some answers there, I think is where I'm hoping to go with TeamWP.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if you are freelancer or you're just beginning something, if you're in the WordPress space, pay attention, because James has got some, data basically that he's going to talk about today. Because when you launch this initiative, we've spoken in the past about it, and you at that point were in the process of gathering up some data. You have something called the Team Experience Index, which is an annual survey which you're going to be conducting, measuring team experience within our ecosystem, the WordPress ecosystem. You've done that. You've got, I believe I'm right in saying you've now done that for the first time, hopefully the first of many. And you're on the podcast really today to tell us what the data has told you. Have I got that right?
Absolutely correct.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I could break it down. James has been very helpful in that we share some show notes when we do these podcasts, and James has broken everything down for me to see. I suspect a lot of that will get copy and pasted into the show notes. So if you're listening to this, I don't know, you're out for a run or you're driving your car and you want to have a mnemonic for something, just go to the show notes, look for this episode, search for James Giroux. It'll be there so you can see all of these. But let's spell it out. What did your survey intend to find out? And let's get into what it did find out.
Yeah. So we conducted the Team Experience Index, which for anybody who's ever been in a company, you might know this also as an employee engagement survey. And the whole idea is to survey or ask questions to people who work in WordPress teams about what it's like to work there. What we have done is we have applied a lens to it, a framework that I've developed at TeamWP called the Open Team Framework. Now, the Open Team Framework basically is 8 different principles around culture, ways of working, kind of like how we approach things. And it's just more of a helpful guide for being able to like categorize things and develop measures that are easy for people to grab and onto. So the 8 are transparent leadership, authentic purpose, candid communication, empowered ownership, collaborative decision-making, continuous learning, inclusive culture, and intentional recognition. So we basically ask questions in each of those areas to try to get a better understanding of how people are feeling about those things. And then also some demographic information as well, just to get a sense of who's actually participating in the survey. Now, what those questions do is they provide us with a temperature check, for lack of a better term, of how people are feeling in that moment about their environment. So a good example of a question would be, our company leaders have communicated a vision that motivates me. So that's a question or a Likert statement is what it's called. And we ask people to tell us how much they agree with that statement, and that helps us to develop a score. We take all the scores from all of these statements that are there, and we have what we call the open team score, which is the average of all of those together. So that's a little bit of that.
Okay.
Do you want me to go into more, Nathan?
Yeah,
I can
just
keep
a
going.
couple of questions around that.
Sure.
Firstly, I think all of those 8 points, they're mostly 2 or 3 words, and they all make sense, except the last one. It doesn't I just don't get it straight off the bat. So could you just explain that last one? What is intentional recognition? Like I say, I think the others are all self-explanatory. What's that last one?
So in a lot of larger workplaces, one area of focus for HR is in the concepts or the area of reward and recognition.
Got it.
Recognition in particular is something that springs up across the board. Doesn't matter what company you're in, as being an area of need, right? Where people don't feel like the work they do is recognized in a way that is rewarding for them, right? Or, kind of validating for them. So when we were coming up, or when I was coming up with the framework, intentional recognition, I wanted to capture that idea of recognition, that idea of reward, but I wanted to wrap it in this idea that it's not something that just happens. It's something you have to be intentional about. It's something you have to build systemically or systematically into the way that you work with your teams.
Got it.
So that's where the concept of intentional recognition came from.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so that was the only wrinkle. Everything else, like I said, will be in the show notes. There's an explanation of each of those, but that's really helpful. Okay, so my first question around the survey is, you obviously got some responses because you have some data. Did you get enough responses? Let's just put it that way. Did you get enough responses to feel confident that the data that you're going to present to us is in fact a decent measure? Obviously, if you had 2 replies to that form, we would question it. But if you had 10,000, we would be, over the moon. That would be amazing. You don't need to go into the numbers, but were you happy with that? Would you like that much again next time? Or it would be better to have more?
I think that's a great question. Bit loaded. And I can go into what I think happened. With anything like this, it's about visibility, right? And where people are able to find it, to fill it in. And how many companies are getting on board. So this first crack at it, I think, is a reflection of who was present in the places where it was being promoted. And that honestly primarily was through social media. So if you are active in social media, chances are you would have seen something about this if you listen to a podcast. So there's a level of engagement with the WordPress community that you would need to have in order to do that. So because of that, we're dealing with generally more engaged WordPress folks than less engaged.
That's an
WordPress
interesting
folks.
observation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. Sorry, I interrupted. Carry on.
No, that's great. And so the score and the scores and the demographic even reflects that. And so I suspect as we go forward, the benefits that teams get, even just from knowing that this exists, hopefully in the future will lead to more diversity in terms of who is encouraged to fill it out.
Yeah.
We have some other little things that are cool too. So we run a paid version of the Team Experience Index called Culture Compass, and that's something that any team can just do on their own for their own private data. And what's really cool is any question that team fills in that is a question from the Team Experience Index, we feed that data in. So the scores in general will become this kind of like living thing over time, so that as new data is entered, old data is removed, and so that score just continues to evolve over time, which will be really cool to see.
That's a really interesting observation about the nature of the people who are contributing first time around. I guess time will tell as time goes on. You get more and more data, and as with every piece of data, the more history it has, I guess the more people come to trust it and so on. So
start from somewhere.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly right. Yeah, really nice. So all right, let's dig into it. You've got next to those 8 areas, you have a score, and in every case it's a double-digit score. So we might see transparent leadership 86, authentic purpose 87. I guess we need to explain what that number actually means. Is that something out of 100? What do those numbers actually represent?
Yeah. So how we get those scores is we ask a series of questions. So each of those kind of top level scores is based on the averages of the combined scores of all of the sub questions. So for example, I think with transparent leadership, there's actually 10 different questions or statements that are given, and the scores range from 80% to 92%. And so the final score of 86% is the net positive score, or the average positive score of all of those questions. What we mean by that is you can choose to answer strongly disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. And what we do is we take the net positive, or the positive, the neutral, and the negative, and we have different numbers around that, percentages, and that's what that score is. So
got it. So the maximum that we could possibly expect would be 100. The minimum would be 0. And so anything in the sort of 70s, 80s, or 90s. I'm thinking about exams. If you go sit an exam at school or something, when you get into the 90s, you're feeling pretty happy about yourself at that point, because 90% in any kind of test really does represent pretty significant coverage of the things that you've been asked about. And okay, let me just go through the results. And given what I've just said, 80s and 90s feels like we're in a good space. This is what we've got. Transparent leadership 86, authentic purpose 87, candid communication 90, empowered ownership 90, collaborative decision-making 88, continuous learning 90. Wow. Inclusive culture 93. Boy, that's really hit it out of the park, hasn't it? Intentional recognition 86. Now that data from the outside, just staring at it, it's screaming at me, everything's great. Yep. Is that the right conclusion to draw?
If you remember back to what we were talking about too, about who fills in the survey, for me, when I see overwhelmingly positive numbers like this, it's actually a red flag. And it's a red flag not because there's anything wrong with the results, but it's a reflection of the highly engaged group that is filling this out.
Interesting, right?
So I suspect that if we were able to draw from teams, and where maybe they weren't on social or they weren't active necessarily in the WordPress community, but were WordPress, just professionals, that score would go down a little bit more, or would be more reflective. Okay. And that's okay. But what this shows us is that those people who were able to find it are feeling particularly good about it. So I would just say with a grain of salt, that the results are maybe skewed to those who are already pretty excited about WordPress. And that's cool too.
Yeah. So the smallest score, if that's the right word, I don't really know, is transparent leadership 86. And the highest one that we've got is inclusive culture 93. So given the grain of salt that you've just mentioned, and given that there may be some caveats about the nature of the people who were able to take this this first time around. What are the conclusions that you are beginning to tease out? Obviously, you've drawn the conclusion that you potentially like a different cohort or a bigger cohort of people filling it out next time. But aside from that, what are the conclusions that you're beginning to draw this first time around?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes through is when we do these kinds of services, we intentionally add in questions in different spots that sort of ask the same question, or are looking for the same kind of answer, but just asked a different way. Each of these principles are not siloed; they're kind of codependent on each other, and so there's crossover as well between them. So when we look at some of the responses, we're looking for where are the strengths in each of these particular areas, and where are the opportunities for growth.
Right.
So with each section, even though like we talk about transparent leadership having 86% being the lowest positive score, if you actually look in the results, there is a question in here that had the score of 80%, and it was the lowest in the entire bucket. And that was, our company effectively directs resources, funding, people, and effort toward company goals. So what that indicates to us is that, the leadership is either not accurately explaining how they make decisions around where effort is going. So when we talk about effort, we talk about like where they're directing people to work specifically in. So maybe it's not as clear, or they're not explaining how that impact is being seen in the company as well.
Yeah.
So that's which. When you look at that, you go, oh yeah, transparent leadership, that makes sense. And so we can take that and go, okay, if we want to see that score grow, right, transparent leadership as a whole grow, here are 3 or 4 things or 1 or 2 things that any company could do to actually elevate that within their team.
Perfect. Yeah. I think what we should do is unpack each of those 8 areas one at a time.
Sure.
Because obviously behind it, as you've just described, there's a bunch of questions. I don't see those questions, but you've got the data there. So if we take them one at a time, you can explain a little bit about how this came out. So you maybe did just do the transparent leadership one, but let's cover it anyway, just in case we missed any of the bits and the pieces. So transparent leadership came out as 86. And the things that you've written in the show notes, I'll just read them out and then you can elaborate. Possible recommendations would be share regular updates on company progress, communicate a clear and motivating vision, and be transparent about resource allocation. Now, you just covered that one, but is there anything you wanted to add to what you've written there?
I think this is one that comes out a lot, even in just conversations I have with teams and people that are working in WordPress. Anytime I do like a social media post on this, it gets a lot of traction. People want to know what is going on. I can tell you stories about how I used to have this when I was at Envato, when I was at Gravity Forms. Anytime you're working with, especially like third-party developers, like maybe you've got an ecosystem where you've got a core product and you've got people that are curious about it. Even in WordPress, we have this, right? We all get excited and amped up to hear Matt's state of the word when we talk about WordPress, because we have this desire to know where things are going so that we can accurately position ourselves to be ready to either capitalize or survive whatever the impending change or thing is going to be. And so consider that in your own company, in your own team as well, that people are curious to know what's going on so they can feel that sense of like positioning of how they fit into that. So one of the things, we sharing regular updates on company progress is just, are we going where we think we're going? You consider how many teams right now in the ecosystem are going through layoff rounds or
right.
Having to let staff go. And that conversation becomes easier if people are in the know about how things are going business-wise, right? Like people get clear about it, clear-eyed. So yeah, that's what I would say on transparent leadership. But it's not just about communicating all the things all the time, right? You want to be strategic about it. But being consistent, I think, is part of it as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And now that I give it some thought, it isn't really any surprise that that one of all 8 got the least score, because it's the thing that you do, isn't it? You're at the water cooler and you're talking about things, and typically the disgruntled conversations usually are about leadership. You know, you're concerned about the way that your boss is behaving towards you, or the I don't know, the way that you haven't been communicated about. You've been moved from one team to another and you never knew about it. Or, as you just said, job security at the moment is a real thing. And if you just don't have any insight, any window into how the company is more broadly doing, then you're going to be worried on that level. Yeah. And I suppose that feeds into that. Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so next one, slightly higher, but still second lowest, is authentic purpose. I'll just read what you said. Authentic purpose came out as an 87. And the suggestions, or the recommendations, I should say, are ensure team members understand how their work contributes to the company goals and foster a sense of pride in the company's accomplishments. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, this one is interesting because it speaks to kind of like that internal side of it a bit, and it's a little bit more ethereal, right? When you consider that we're talking a lot about how people feel about where they work and the work that they do. Some of the questions we ask in this space are things like, my work has special meaning. This is not just a job.
Oh,
and
wow.
And, that did really well. It actually scored 92%. But then, it's also including things like, I rarely think about looking for a job elsewhere. Or I see myself working here in 2 years' time. It speaks to like that sense of motivation, but also like, I know how my work contributes to our company goals, or I would recommend our company as a great place to work. Working here motivates me to go beyond what I would normally do in a similar role elsewhere. So these types of questions that are really about like looking at the outcome, I guess, if you will, of some kind of vision that's been shared with them, or understanding of how they fit into the company's mission.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where the larger a team gets, the harder it is for everyone to feel connected to that vision. And if you combine it, right, like talk about how none of these are siloed principles, but if you connect it as well with transparent leadership, your team's not proactively, or your leadership's not proactively communicating what the vision is or what you're working toward, it can be hard to feel like your work is connected to that. And we all need that. I think in today's day and age, we're beyond the point where we just show up at work, clock in and clock out. We want to feel connected to some kind of purpose. It's probably why we work in WordPress as well. So without having that meaning, we're missing a big piece of that motivating, thing to move us forward.
I do know what you mean. I think there's kind of a nice virtuous cycle between transparent leadership and authentic purpose. There's a good degree of overlap there, isn't there? In that if the leadership is transparent about how the company's doing and what have you, then the team can have a sense of what their purpose is and what the wider goals of the company are. So those two seem to fit really nicely together, right at the top of the list. Okay, we're going up in score now. The third one is candid communication, got a full 90. And your recommendations from the data that you've got is foster open, honest, two-way communication and create a psychologically safe place to work. So again, I'll just hand it over.
So this is interesting. So a lot of the scores were really high, and I would say that this is probably a function of who filled out the survey a little bit, and also the distributed nature of a lot of WordPress teams kind of forces us to be more proactive at communicating, because we don't have the water cooler the same way. We don't have those passive communication approaches where you can just sort of rub shoulders with folks as you're going in the door, greeting people as you go in. Every communication is kind of intentional, right? Like you get on a call for your stand up, or you get with your team to do a weekly call, or whatever those rituals are. So we have to have that. But in that are conversations that are positive and conversations that are negative. And even though we scored really high on some things, like there's open and honest two-way communication in our team, scored a 97, I want to counter that with the lowest score in this group, which was when it is clear that someone is not delivering in their role, we do something about it, which actually only got a 78%. So quite a big divide there. It's still relatively high, all things considered. But in the context of these scores, quite low compared to some of the others that we're seeing, which leads me to believe that maybe we're not as good at providing constructive feedback, or sort of heading off somebody who's maybe not doing the best or not performing where they need to be at. And so we also ask questions around inclusivity in these types of things as well, right? Like when we think of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, around things like perspectives like mine are included in decision making, which got a 90, which again, I think is reflective of who filled this in. Coincidentally, just as a bit of a demographic point, 28% of those who responded to the survey identified as being from a historically underrepresented group, which I think is really cool. The number of women or people who identify as female was also significantly higher. It was like 65% of those who, like, you didn't have to say whether you were from a historically underrepresented group or disclose your gender, but if you chose to, the results showed that 65% were women, which I thought was really cool. But also probably overly representative of things like social media fields and marketing fields, where people are present on Twitter more and in those roles, compared to developers, which tend to skew more male.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll tell you something, James, and I hope that this goes down well. I'm obviously chatting to you about this, and you've explained this to me before, but this whole thing is starting to make way more sense to me now. We're 3 points in, and I am really getting an insight into what you're trying to do here. This is great. I'm really enjoying this. Because now you're explaining these little subsections. I can see the overlap. I am getting a real understanding of what you're trying to do here. And, if you're listening to this and you've been half paying attention, maybe stop, rewind, listen to it again, because this is fabulous. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I'm getting a real understanding of what you're doing. So firstly, bravo for doing it. And let's move on. Number 4, empowered ownership. Again, quite a nice score, 90. The recommendations out of that were ensure team members have the resources they need. Oh, yeah. The resources they need, act on innovative ideas, and hold everyone accountable for results. Once again, over to you.
I think the big thing is making sure we're clear about what empowered ownership means. So really, this is, interestingly enough, I saw a tweet from somebody in the WordPress ecosystem who's a CEO talking about how they ran all of the different things that they do in their job through chatbot or ChatGPT, and we're told that they needed to hire 5 different folks to take over a bunch of the work, or they had 5 different roles that they could define out of it. And I thought that was really interesting. And I also talked to a lot of overloaded leaders who just feel like they have to make all the decisions about everything all the time. And empowered ownership is really all about figuring out how to distribute that decision-making throughout your team and throughout your organization, and letting go of some of those big things and equipping your team to be able to make decisions and own those decisions, both the consequences and the celebrations from it, as possible, right? Like that's just what it is. So, we have enough autonomy to perform our jobs effectively. That scored super huge because, of course, we're all remote for the most part in WordPress. So you have to be able to give that autonomy away. But coincidentally, we're also maybe not equipping with all of the information. To me, this is a leadership training thing, right? Like the information I need to do my job effectively is readily available was the lowest, scoring 83%. So there's opportunity there for us to just do better at, especially in middle management, of equipping our teams with all of the things they need in order to be able to do their job effectively. And so there's a communication opportunity there.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that one. I mean, I know personally, I find it very hard to delegate decision making, but I also know that the most, and I'm doing air quotes here, the most successful people I know are stupendously good at giving responsibility over to other people and saying, that's yours, you run with it, and then report back. And yeah, so that's really interesting. Okay, thank you.
I found early on, there's this question, sort of like, again, a tool that I've used to help me in delegating. It's what are the things on my plate this week that only I can do? And what are the things that anyone can do? And if there are things that I'm doing that anyone can do, and I've got a team under me that can be doing this, what can I be doing to equip them to do that and own that? And is there something here that only they can do, right? Or that I can give away to them where, I'm fine with that. And also thinking to yourself, how do I de-risk this? I love that word de-risk. It's probably a corporate buzzword, but like if I want to give something away or I want to delegate a decision, but I'm worried about the outcome that they're not going to produce the results that I would expect, or they're not going to do it at the level that I want. As a manager, right, or as a leader, my role is to do everything I can to equip them so that is de-risked, so that the chances of them, not doing it the way I want or not being successful are lower. And that's one of my primary responsibilities as a leader. So getting into that headspace, I think for a lot of folks is part of that transition from it's going to sound awful, but from a doer to a leader, a doer to a manager.
Yeah. And again, another virtuous cycle. You imagine the more that you can delegate those things, the more time you get in your life to concentrate on the other things in the company that need addressing. That we've talked about them, points 1, 2, and 3. So yeah, again, I'm starting to make connections with all of the underlying stuff you're doing here. This is really interesting. Number 5, 88, a bit lower than some of the others, but nevertheless, collaborative decision making. So the recommendation is foster a sense of team unity, ensure tasks are fairly divided. Nice. And promote collaboration. Once again, over to you.
So this, I think, dovetails really well into empowered ownership, right? Like if we talk about delegating work and equipping our teams to be able to do these kinds of things, the counterbalance to that is collaborative decision making. So helping your team know when to surface things that need maybe broader input for decisions. But it's two-sided, right? Management involves people in decisions that affect their jobs or work environment was one of the statements that we had on here. It scored 88, which is the same as the overall score. I am appropriately involved in decisions that affect my work, scored a 90%. The lowest one was administrative tasks that don't have a specific owner are fairly divided. That scored the lowest at 79. And interestingly, this is actually what I call a DEI or an inclusivity question, because often what happens is people with the least amount of power, right, in the dynamic of a team are given the load of tasks that don't have an owner.
Yeah.
And that's coming through here as well. So we can see that there's work to do in order to make sure that just because somebody's voice is maybe not as strong as others, that we are not just assuming and dumping all of the extra work on them, right? But that we are looking for equitable distribution.
Yeah, thank you. Number 6 really resonates with me. I always get bored quickly, and I always want to know what's the next thing that I can learn. I don't know why that is, but that's just a feature of my life. So this is continuous learning. It got a 90, and the recommendations are encourage learning and growth, see mistakes as opportunities for improvement, and show interest in team members' career goals. As I said, for me, if my job was the same week in, week out, and there was no hope that it was ever going to be different, oh, crikey, the interest evaporated within minutes of me starting the job. So, yeah, over to you.
Continue. This is one of my favorite ones because I think it's one that has the most opportunity to transform a company from the ground up. When we approach everything we do with this continuous learning mindset, it totally changes the way that we engage with each other. It moves us from a failure model to an experimentation model because we change the framing of our questions, right? So for a marketing campaign, if we don't achieve the results maybe that we expect, rather than that campaign being a failure, it's an opportunity to learn. What did we do in this campaign, or what did we learn coming out of this campaign that we want to apply to the next one, right? Which I think is a much healthier way to approach work. And when we apply that continuous learning mindset, not just to the work that we do, but like who we are and our sort of approach to personal growth or career growth, I think, and development, I think that's really, really exciting. So yeah, developing that idea that mistakes are not just failures, but they're opportunities for improvement. But that we're also looking at like, how are we developing skills in ourselves in order to be able to improve on that? Oh, like I did this campaign, but I didn't really understand Twitter all that much, or the Twitter, like ads dashboard. And so if I knew more about that would be really helpful. Okay, well, let's go and learn more about that so that we can do better next time, right?
Yeah.
Like all of that kind of stuff is really helpful.
I also think we're in such a fast-moving industry. What was applicable 3 years ago, broadly speaking, is out the window. So the opportunity to learn and have that as part of your job description, to continue learning and be given those opportunities and the time and the resources, and have somebody in the company taking interest in what you're doing and what you're learning and how it can affect the company's bottom line. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, next one, biggest score, inclusive culture, came out with a 93, very impressive. The recommendation is support flexible working arrangements, ensure workloads are reasonable, and foster a sense of belonging. Once more, over to you.
So I want to be clear, like when we talk about inclusive culture, we're not talking specifically about DEIB sort of like initiatives. That's sort of that's a part of it, but it's really about this idea of being able to create an environment at work where we're promoting creativity, collaboration, innovation, right? Like creating a safe and supportive space where everyone feels welcome, heard, and respected, regardless of their background, perspectives, and experiences. So it's not the same thing as, what we might come to think of as inclusion or that, but it's inclusive of that. Apologize for using the same word a lot, but we ask questions like, I can be myself around here. I feel like I belong here. We are genuinely supported if we choose to make use of flexible working arrangements. My team leader cares about my well-being. People look forward to coming to work here. So it's a bit more, sort of that sense of, yeah, I'm accepted for who I am, and I'm allowed to bring my authentic self to work and be who I am. And that's just allowed, and that's great, right? And it makes it easy for me to just get on with things and be myself. So.
Yeah. Okay, last of the 8 points is intentional recognition. That was the one that I queried at the beginning. So the recommendation is acknowledge outstanding service, ensure promotions go to those who deserve them. Oh, that's a good one. And provide fair compensation. Okay, so for the last time, over to you.
The compensation one is always going to be an interesting one because so you have to, everyone wants to get paid more, right? I think that's pretty true. But the way we ask the question, or the way we present the question, is I believe my total compensation is fair in the context of our industry. and it got 83. So not too bad, actually, all things considered. But we're also looking at things like, we acknowledge people who deliver outstanding service here, and that scored a 91. I receive appropriate recognition for good work. My job performance is evaluated fairly. But also, I believe there are good career opportunities for me here. One of the things that often happens in smaller teams is that the job you have is the job you will always have. And that sense of forward momentum in your career doesn't exist because, well, first of all, teams don't have the systems in place to facilitate that, but also there's not a lot of like upward momentum. If you're, an engineer on the team, maybe the only position to go is up to like the lead engineer, the engineering manager. And if that position is filled by the founder, for example, that role will never become available. So being able to develop ways to recognize people and to actually create career pathways for them, keeping also in mind things like continuous learning, those pathways become really important. And we want to recognize people also in ways that are appropriate for them. I use this example a lot. My wife hates getting public praise. So like if you want to encourage her, you take her aside and you just say, hey, what you did there was really awesome. Well done. And with no one around. And that is all she needs. But if you bring her up front, right, or you do like a public Slack message or something like that for her, oh, it's the worst thing. So we have to find within our teams the approach to recognition that works individually for each one, and also make sure that we're compensating people, right? So if somebody's doing a good job, pay them for it, right? And in your own budgeting, like if you're a senior leader or you're in charge of these kinds of things, plan for not just the role somebody has today, but the role they're going to grow into in the next 2, 3, 4 years, and financially plan for that. Hey, we want to pay this person this, or we hope to get them to from a junior to a mid to a senior in the next 2 to 3 years, and here's the pathway to get them there.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. So we've been through all the 8 different points. You have distilled those into 3 top-level recommendations. But as we've gone into everything in depth, I think I'll copy and paste those into the show notes. So if you're interested in that, head to the website and you can look at them there. But before we finish it off, I'm just wondering, you've written down next steps. So in terms of TeamWP and the ongoing nature of this survey, just tell us where you're going next, what's happening in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, well, I want to get these results out there. So, big campaign coming up to just publicize these results.
Nice.
I would love to see teams, whether they're using TeamWP or not, to ask these questions or build these into their own habits and rituals within their team. These are all good questions that any team can ask at any time, and these results will be open and public. So if you're looking to compare how your team is doing to, the global WordPress ecosystem, then I think this is a great resource to do that. Obviously, if you're looking for support and help, love for you to come and hang out with us at TeamWP, start a conversation and see where it goes. But what I would love is for teams to be able to have data for themselves that they can then make informed decisions about where they want to invest their time. So I use Barn2 as a great example. We did this with Barn2, and they identified, transparent leadership as an area of opportunity for them, not because they weren't doing great things, but because their team wanted to spend more time in connecting together, right? And they wanted to invest time together. And so that became an action item, right, for them to support the growth of their people and their culture, to go out and do these things. And Katie Keith, you can see her on Twitter. She is always talking about, we did our next, big all team gathering, and, we played this game or we did this thing. And it's just really cool to see how they're very proactively taking the results of their own engagement survey and applying that to the way that they're working together and seeing positive results from that. So I'd love to see that happen all around the ecosystem.
Yeah, honestly, I've had a real epiphany during this recording. It really has. The pieces of the jigsaw puzzle have firmly found their way into the right place. So firstly, if you've listened to this and you've got something out of it, bravo, great. If you didn't quite get it, honestly, go back, listen to it again. It may very well be worthwhile. And also, why not just share this episode around with the people in your organization? If you're a leader, you could share it with your employees. If you're an employee, you could, dare I say it, share it with your leadership team. And you never know, in the future, you may be able to do what Barn 2 did and implement ideas and strategies from this. Because there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that it's unlikely you're going to think of all of these independently. And so having TeamWP having your back is really, really great. So you mentioned that we can go to your website. That's great. We can find that. We can Google it. But also the URL is fairly straightforward. It's teamwp.co.co. Where else could we find you specifically, James? Be that an email address or a social platform?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, sharing photos of my kids and I fishing, but also talking about leadership and a lot of this kind of stuff. So it's just my name at James Giroux, James, James Giroux, for those of you curious about how to spell my French-Canadian last name.
Yeah.
There it is.
Okay, perfect. Well, a really interesting topic. As I said, I've got a lot out of this. It was really, really interesting to delve deeper. James, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and very best of luck with TeamWP.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Thank you, everyone.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. Fascinating chatting to James today about the subject of teams and the state of teams in the WordPress space. I'm pretty sure that if you listen to that podcast carefully, you'll realize that James is pretty serious about this endeavor. He's gone into, as you heard, lots and lots of detail. You can obviously contact him. You can find links on our show notes page. Head to wpbuilds.com and search for episode number 356, and all of the links, including James's comprehensive show notes, are included there. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. Find out more by heading to go.me/WP Builds. And we do thank GoDaddy Pro for their unwavering support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, we'll be back next week. It'll be a chat with David Wormsley and myself. Now, I know that I said that David Wormsley was leaving the podcast, but if you listened back, you'll have noticed that I've started a new podcast with him. It's called The No Script Show, and we're hijacking the WP Builds podcast for several weeks to give you an indication of what that is all about. Give you a bit of a clue. It's all about web development, but not WordPress web development. The site for that is noscript.show. Also, don't forget that we do absolutely loads each and every week. Head over to wpbuilds.com/schedule, and you'll be able to see the times that we're doing things so that you can join us live. We've got things like This Week in WordPress. We've got our Speed It Up show with Sabrina Zidane. And we've also got a Gato GraphQL webinar. And there's probably going to be loads of those in the new year as well. Okay, that truly is all that I've got for you this week. I'm going to fade in some cheesy music and say, stay safe. Bye-bye for now.